the good old basketball simulator we've been raging at for, well, however long you've been playing 2K. Believe it or not, most of us who are old enough started out playing NBA Live because before the dawn of the PS3 and the 360, Live was just more popular for whatever reason. However, around 2K6 and 2K7, when the then next-gen consoles came out, that's when 2K really started to push Live to the side, and most of us haven't bothered to look back since then, mainly because Live hasn't given us a reason to. Because 2K took over at that time around 10 years ago, this video is going to focus on games from 2K7 and beyond when I list out 10 of the best 2K teams of all time. What's up NBA fans, Dom2K on the mic, and you probably guessed that I played 2K for a while because, yeah, Dom2K, pretty self-explanatory. Nearly 10 years later, and I've spent way too much time on 2K aside from this year because I just couldn't put up with 17's horrible AI that makes the game way too easy. Despite that, I've still got my fair share of great memories playing with and against great teams in the franchise, so I figured I could take a trip down memory lane to make this video for you guys. Number 10, the 2K9 Cavs. Alright, so let me defend this pick before anybody goes apeshit on it. I'll preface it by saying you really had to be around for NBA 2K9 to understand why such a talentless roster was still so hard to deal with. And speaking of that, the personnel on this roster, or the lack thereof, was the reason they had to come in 10th on this list. But when you got online on NBA 2K9, people were either using the Lakers, Celtics, or the Cavs, with some of the other decent teams being sprinkled around here and there, of course. Unfortunately, the Cavs had LeBron, and LeBron was the second coming of Jesus in this game. There was only one thing you had to do to play with this team. You set a pick with Ilgauskas and run LeBron to the rim where he would windmill slam on anybody short of a prime Wilt Chamberlain. So obviously LeBron is about 99% of what made this team so great in real life, and that stood pretty true in 2K9 as well. But what also made them difficult was their outside shooting. If you were to commit too much to LeBron and try to stop his ridiculous dunking habits, there was Mo Williams, Delonte West, and Wally Zerbiak to knock down open threes. So you do the math here. Online quarters were only set to like 5 or 6 minutes, which was enough time for LeBron to take care of basically anything the user wanted. Combine that with the shooting touch of the squad, and yes, this roster that everyone loves to hate on 8 years later was actually one of the toughest 2K teams to deal with. But make no mistake about it, if 2K9's dunking wasn't so overpowered, it would have taken a lot more skill to use these guys, and the lack of a need for skill in this game really helped make this team what it was. Number 9, the 2K12 Clippers. This one is very low key. I'm not sure how many people realize the Clippers were actually deadly online for a couple of years because I never had anyone fighting me to use them in the team select screen. But yeah, what we thought the Clippers would be in real life when CP3 teamed up with Blake Griffin, that's what they actually were in 2K. The obvious play here was that Chris Paul's passing ability made Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan very hard to guard in any pick and roll situations, so that was the obvious go-to option. But the team also had a lot of gems on it. Today's main problem with using the Clippers is that they never have a viable small forward, but in 2K12, Caron Butler was perfect at the 3 spot because with so much attention to CP3 and Blake, I found myself getting constant wide open looks with him from the 3-point line, and he was also athletic as well. The shooting guard position was also sweet because it was so interchangeable. You had your choice of Chauncey Billups, Nick Young, or Randy Foye, who all had great shooting ability, but Nick Young was especially good for his athleticism, which allowed him to catch endless lobs off cuts from CP3. But it was the interchangeable factor that really made this team so great in 2K. For 5-minute online quarters, you had your choice from an 11-man rotation, and not just 11 nobodies, but 11 really useful players. I didn't even mention Kenyon Martin, Mo Williams, and Reggie Evans. You essentially had a backup player for every position of your starting 5 that could contribute something, and that was an overwhelming factor for most opponents. Bottom line, if you didn't look the Clippers' way in 2K12, you missed out on a lot of easy wins. Number 8, the 95 Magic. The 95 Magic have been around in 2K for some time now. To the best of my memory, they've been present since NBA 2K12. This team was amazing in real life and had the potential to go much further than they actually did, and in 2K it's really no different as far as dominance. The first thing you'll notice is that Penny Hardaway creates a massive matchup problem for just about any opponent you'll face. He's a 6'7" point guard who's super athletic, so unless the opponent wants his point guard to get eaten alive, he'll likely have to switch a bigger body on him. After Penny, it gets much worse down low, where there's a young Shaquille O'Neal that very few centers have the ability to guard in the game. I feel like this team flies under the radar because most 2K players don't have a great post game, but somebody who knows how to control the paint with a dominant big man could do serious damage on both ends with Shaq. Just when you thought 2 mismatches weren't enough, this Magic team has 2 dead-eye shooters on both wings with Nick Anderson in 3D, better known as Dennis Scott. When you use their floor spreading abilities to give Shaq and Penny the rest of the court to dominate with, this starting lineup is missing absolutely nothing, and that's without mentioning that you still have Horace Grant, who's a great rebounder and also has a mid-range jumper that gives Shaq the paint to himself. The reason the Magic came relatively low on this list was because they don't have a bench. After the team starts subbing, you've really got no help coming from the second unit, which tends to be a time where the opponent can get back into the game. However, again, online games are pretty short, so you can use the starting lineup talent to bridge the gap. In all honesty, they aren't as effective against modern teams that can play small ball like the Warriors and Cavs online, so they were probably a bit more dominant back when they first came out around 2012, but even with that, they get one of my spots for one of 2K's best teams of all time. Number 7, the 2K9 Celtics. You can really interpret this one however you want. It was actually the 2K8 Celtics that won the championship, but the 2K9 roster that came back was actually a bit better in 2K. Their defense is ridiculous, Paul Pierce has an endless array of moves, and Ray Allen is knocking down any shot you give him. But this is also back when 2K gave any superstar a high rating, so KG was rated a 99 overall. Because of that, he had the same superhuman dunking ability that LeBron and Kobe had in this game, so believe it or not, KG was actually busting out windmills in the post. I know, totally unrealistic, but that only added to their dominance. You had a huge advantage with this squad in 09 because the concept of a big three was just being revived, meaning no other team had three players like Pierce, Garnett, and Allen all playing together. Their bench wasn't quite as good as it was in 08, but that didn't matter much because the team was just coming off a championship and 2K treated them as so. They were a dominant team for the same reason they're still dominant in 2K today. Elite defense, multiple scoring options, rebounding. This team had it all back then and they still got it all now. Number 6, the 05 Suns. This Suns roster was reintroduced to the game in NBA 2K16 and they're easily in the running for the best offense in the game. Sporting a lineup of Nash, Richardson, Marion, and Stoudemire, there's enough scoring here to make any opponent launch their controller into the TV. But on the bench, the onslaught continues with Joe Johnson, Leandro Barbosa, and Jim Jackson. I'm aware that Joe Johnson actually started in real life, but for some reason in 2K, the CPU opts to bring him off the bench if you set the rotation or so, and truth be told, it works either way. This team creates massive problems for any opponent with their shooting. With Nash at the point guard, not only is he a huge scoring threat, but you can never quite tell when he's gonna pass. That's an issue because he has to prime Stoudemire down low and his choice of 3-point snipers on both wings. On top of that, both Sean Marion and Joe Johnson are prone to take over a game at any time. Joe can go off the dribble, hence his name ISO Joe, but Marion has also got the ability to defend the other team's best player with rebounding as well, and this is all just in case Nash and Stoudemire aren't the main focuses at the moment. Speaking of Sean Marion, he's a big part of why this team is allowed to play small ball. If you take Stephen Hunter out, move Sean Marion to the 4 and have Stoudemire at the 5, this team is nearly unguardable because if you're playing a real power forward, there's no way he can chase Sean Marion around the court. The big thing with the Suns is that they're easy to score on because they're a D'Antoni coach team. Outside of Sean Marion, they're not making a huge effort to shut anybody down, so another dominant offensive team can take them on. But you can find yourself down by double digits in a hurry, and good luck trying to chase all those shooters around while trying to make that comeback. Number 5, the 2K12 Thunder. This one should be widely known mainly because every other game online in 2K12 featured someone trying to use the Thunder, and for good reason. You really only need two names here, Westbrook and Kevin Durant. With 5-minute quarters, it didn't matter who else you used on the squad. KD and Westbrook were enough to make your life miserable for that short amount of time. I'm not sure I need to explain why KD was so hard to guard, we still see that today. He was making everything you looked at, he was athletic enough to get to the rim and dominate, and he got hot in a hurry, so anybody using him who knew what they were doing could eat you alive. And then when they took a break from using KD, you had to deal with Westbrook's unstoppable drives to the rim, and this wasn't a bad defensive team either. This was before Kendrick Perkins completely lost his value, so having him down low with Ibaka to block shots was making it difficult for anyone to get to the rim. But what really gave this team a nice kick was having James Harden come off the bench for the last time in a 2K game. Of course, Harden wasn't close to what he is today, and nobody knew that he'd eventually be a cheat code in 2K, but when you consider the fact that he was backing up two of the best players in the game, this team was extremely frustrating to deal with. We're getting close to the time where we need 2K to add these guys to the classic rosters. They did it for the 07 Cavs, the 2013 Heat, so this group definitely deserves a nod. Number 4, the 64 Celtics. For better or for worse, the 64 Celtics are easily one of the most overpowered teams in 2K history, and I don't think many people know about it seeing as how I've never once ran into them online. There's no true way to measure how good 60 players would be in today's NBA, so 2K plays it safe by being respectful and basically making them gods in the game. Your biggest problems are going to come from matching up with John Havlicek and Sam Jones on the wings. Even though there was no three-point line in their day, they're elite shooters that'll hit any open shot you give them from out there, but they do major damage from the mid-range as well. Actually, that's where most of the damage comes from, and this would throw anybody off because most 2K teams just launch threes non-stop. And when you're on offense, Havlicek and Jones are amazing defenders on the perimeter. This contributes to the great team defense they can play to shut your best guy down. But what really makes this whole thing work, the same way it did in real life, is Bill Russell. Russell is the best kept secret in 2K games, mainly because he's not a huge scorer. Not a lot of points equals not a lot of people flocking to play with him. But he just might be the best defensive anchor in 2K. He totally controls the paint with his elite rebounding opposed defense. Anybody who gets past Havlicek or Jones has to face Bill as the last line of defense, and when he's not blocking your shots, he's still changing them, making it likely that you're gonna miss. That just contributes to what makes the Celtics such a great team in 2K because they play such great team defense. If you put these guys inside a simulated My League, they pretty much win 60 games and at least get to the NBA Finals every time. As a matter of fact, you can check one of my old videos where I tried to find out what the best team in NBA 2K16 was, and I'm pretty sure the Celtics ended up winning that one. Just a testament to how good they are in 2K. Number 3, the '87 Lakers. It feels kinda pointless to explain why the Showtime Lakers are one of the best 2K teams in history. They were a dynasty in the 80s and they pack a huge punch in the virtual world today. They're great for pretty much the same reasons the '95 Magic are so great in 2K. It all starts with Magic Johnson, who is a 6'9" point guard, which is absurd because that's reaching modern power forward size. Not only does he create a ridiculous matchup problem with the opposing point guard the same way Penny Hardaway does, but Magic can completely control a game through both scoring and distributing. After he's done destroying your undersized point guard, you've got to deal with the likes of James Worthy and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem is going to post your center up and score whichever way he chooses, and Worthy adds the athletic punch to the team. At the shooting guard position, you've got Byron Scott who can knock down open threes, but then you also got Michael Cooper, who is the perfect guy to distract you from Magic and Worthy and Kareem. If you think you're going to play help defense when Magic starts posting your point guard up, Cooper or Byron Scott is sitting wide open ready to knock down threes. And if that's not bad enough, Cooper is also a great defender in the game, so you've got your hands completely full on both sides of the court. Because Magic Johnson has problems on defense, especially with smaller, quicker guards, they just use Michael Cooper to hound whoever your best player is. In short, the '87 Lakers are a team with an extremely high basketball IQ and personnel that's just a matchup nightmare. Speaking of personnel, this next team haunted every 2K player's dreams just 4 short years ago. Number 2, the 2K13 Heat. The Miami Heat were an absolute cheat code in NBA 2K13, no other way to put it. We'll get to their personnel in a moment, but recall that 2K13 was a game where you couldn't block dunks like you can today. This basically meant that if LeBron or any other superstar started the dunk animation, it was pretty much finishing in a dunk. Well, that was a bad thing when going against the Heat because having Wade and James on the same team meant there were going to be dunks and alley-oops for days, especially from LeBron James, who was really at his athletic peak around this time. And from a talent standpoint, anybody who had half of an idea of what they were doing really would never lose with these guys. It was great that you could run the offense through Wade or James, but a gem that often went unnoticed just like in real life was Chris Bosh. Again, most 2K players don't use the post, and Chris Bosh had a great back-to-basket game that could be used. A lot of people just didn't know it because he was only a spot-up shooter in real life during his time with the Heat. Aside from being able to abuse the other team's big men, you could also use Bosh's range as a threat in the pick-and-pop game with Wade or James, allowing them so much space to get to the rim or getting Bosh a wide-open jumper. That's what really made this team a nightmare to guard, their floor spacing ability. There was one lineup that people loved to play where they would have Wade at the point guard, Ray Allen at the shooting guard, LeBron James at the 3, Shane Battier at the 4, and Chris Bosh at the 5. And yeah, you could probably imagine that this lineup was pretty impossible to guard. Although Ray Allen did bring a good punch off the bench, having Wade at the point guard position allowed him to dominate any other opposing point guard. They were shooting all over the floor, so you were constantly chasing people around the 3-point line. In short, your only hope against this lineup was that you could make them pay on the inside. On top of all of that, there really just weren't many teams in the game that wouldn't be overwhelmed by the amount of talent on that roster. Before there was the 17 Warriors creating that problem, there was the 13 Heat, and in 2K13, there was only one team that had enough talent on the roster to stand up to these guys. Number 1, the 2K13 Lakers. In the summer of 2012, when the Lakers pulled off the impossible to add Dwight Howard and Steve Nash just 2 seasons removed from their most recent championship, the NBA world went insane, kind of like they did when KD joined the Warriors. The assumption was that Nash and Howard, along with Kobe and Gasol, would make the team unbeatable. Ron Artest even said the Lakers were going to go 73-9, and it's pretty ironic that this ended up happening just a few years later. Well, of course injuries completely destroyed these dreams from the get-go, but that didn't stop them from being a juggernaut in the virtual world. Yes, in 2K13, the idea was that if somebody pulled out the Miami Heat, you pulled out the Lakers to counter it. Maybe these guys' bench wasn't as great as Miami's, but their starting lineup alone would win you games. Kobe was still one of the best players in the game, and so was Dwight Howard, being that this was before his game completely wilted away. The player that really made this sweet was Pau Gasol, because he could shoot well enough to play the high post and have to be respected from there by the defense, and he could also pass really well, which made the offense run smoothly. And just like with Chris Bosh, if you were one of the rare 2K players that used the post, D12 and Gasol were deadly down low. Dwight could command a double team that would leave Kobe or Nash wide open, which was never a good idea. Nash provided shooting and was still a great passer in the game as well, and you could run picks with him using either Howard or Gasol, which was a lot for any team to handle. And of course, if you were a skilled player, you could get the absolute most out of Kobe's game that didn't just include dunking. He had an array of moves with his back to the basket, could shoot from basically anywhere within reason. I don't need to say much, he was fucking Kobe Bryant. But playing Kobe with 3 ultra talented guys meant the defender couldn't just focus on shutting him down, so in short, the Lakers had an overwhelming amount of star talent that was pretty destructive for the opposition. I had a philosophy in 2K13 that I would only use the Heat or Lakers if my opponent chose one of the two teams. Otherwise, it just didn't seem fair to have 3 or 4 of the best players in the game, kind of like it isn't all that impressive to win with today's Warriors online. For as long as the Warriors stay together, I say 2K should add the 2013 Lakers back into the game as a historic team and bring back the ability to see who your opponent actually picks. Seeing your opponent pick the Warriors and being able to choose between the Lakers or Heat to challenge them would be awesome. You can pick Miami today of course, but you can't see who your opponent is picking, so you can't really intentionally match these two teams up. Speaking of the 17 Warriors, you may notice that they weren't on my list, mainly because I didn't feel the need to explain why the 17 Warriors are probably the greatest 2K team of all time. The video is called 10 of the best 2K teams of all time, but we all know the Warriors are really number 1. They have 4 players from the Western All-Star team. Curry can shoot from anywhere within half court. You can never double him for fear of leaving KD or Klay open. I'm really not getting into this today, to be honest. Everyone uses the Warriors online in 2K17, so we understand they're really the pinnacle of teams in the virtual world. But again, I got out of having them on this list by titling the video 10 of the best 2K teams of all time and not the 10 best. Speaking of which, now I want you to go in the comment section and tell me what 2K teams you would have on your all-time list. 2K has been around for quite a while, and I know for a fact there's teams that you guys love to play with that weren't on this list, so make sure you leave them down below. Make sure to also leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Hit the bell next to my name if you want notifications for my future videos. I'm Dom2K, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.